Behind a crumbling barn in rural Texas, authorities made a heartbreaking discovery. A bear mother, gaunt and ragged, crouched in the shadows with a tiny cub in her mouth. She didn't try to flee. Instead, she stepped forward into the light as though she had been waiting for this moment. The men who found her froze in disbelief. None of them were prepared for what came next. She set the cub carefully on the dirt, then lifted her head and began to rumble, grunt, and moan all at once. It wasn't a roar, it wasn't a threat. It was something in between, a strange chorus of sounds that carried a weight the men couldn't quite place. It was as if she were trying to explain herself, trying to sweet-talk her way into being understood. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. Bears didn't do this. Animals caught near people usually tried to vanish, to resist, to snarl their way out of trouble. But this mother acted as though she had chosen them. Her cub mewed, stumbled toward a boot, and one of the men instinctively crouched to shield it. The mother bear immediately let out another series of low, rapid huffs. "She's talking," one of the men whispered. By the time they transported her to the Lone Pine Wildlife Center on the outskirts of Abilene, word had already spread. A bear mother had turned herself in, cub in her mouth, rumbling the whole way. She wasn't caught. She wasn't cornered. She walked in on her own, said Daniel Reed, the center's director, shaking his head as he watched the exhausted bear being guided into the holding enclosure. "I've been working with wildlife for 25 years, Daniel muttered, his voice hushed. "I've never seen this kind of behavior." Dr. Thomas Hale, the lead veterinarian at Lone Pine, approached the enclosure slowly. The mother bear was pressed against the back corner, not with fear, but with a strange intensity. Her cub was curled beneath her belly. She let out another deep rumble, long and insistent. "She's demanding something," Thomas murmured. "Food, water, help. She isn't hiding. She's negotiating." The staff named her Luma, and her cub, still smaller than a football and unsteady on his paws, they called Ryan. Daniel urged the team to give them space at first, but it was soon clear Luma didn't want space. Each morning, when Thomas brought fresh meat, she paced the gate and moaned until he set the dish down. When Ryan nosed forward, she nudged him closer to the food with her muzzle, then turned to Thomas with a low chuff as though thanking him or reminding him who was in charge. Aaron Blake, one of the younger technicians, chuckled the first time he saw it. "Doc, she's literally sweet-talking you, full-on giving you attitude if you're late." And it was true. If food didn't arrive quickly, or if anyone besides Thomas approached, Luma filled the enclosure with grunts and moans, her voice rising like a complaint. She wasn't aggressive, she was bossy. Day by day, Luma carried Ryan closer to the humans. At first, she left him near the back while she hovered watchfully. Then she began setting him at the very gate, stepping back and letting out low calls until Thomas crouched nearby. Ryan would wobble forward and paw curiously at his boots, while Luma sat tall, her golden eyes sharp but calm. "She's showing him off," Aaron whispered one morning. "Like she's saying, 'This is my kid, you better take care of him.'" It became a ritual. Every morning, as though keeping an appointment, Luma brought Ryan forward. If someone else came instead of Thomas, she complained loudly until he appeared. Only then would she quiet, crouching low with her cub. Thomas began talking back to her softly. "I hear you, Luma. You want him strong. I promise." Sometimes she answered with a huff that sounded so close to acknowledgement, the men swore she understood. Ryan flourished. His coat grew glossy, his legs sturdy. He pawed at sticks, gnawed on shoes through the fence, and once managed to clamber halfway up the wire while Luma grunted in proud approval. She scolded him when he climbed too high. She scolded Thomas if meals were late. She scolded Daniel if he came too close with his clipboard. "She's not our patient." Aaron laughed. "She's our supervisor." Then came the day when everything shifted. One humid afternoon, Thomas knelt at the gate with a dish of chicken. Luma pressed herself against the bars, grumbling low, then reached a paw through. Not to strike, but to tap his boot. Slowly she picked up Ryan and placed him directly at the gate. The cub tumbled forward and landed in Thomas's lap. The staff froze. Thomas didn't move. Ryan scrambled up his leg, sniffing his hands. Luma didn't panic. She sat back, eyes narrowed, and let out a single sharp chuff. "I think she just gave you permission," Aaron whispered. Thomas slowly rested his hand near Ryan's back. The cub leaned into the touch without hesitation. Luma rumbled again, softer this time, almost like a purr. From that day on, she carried Ryan to the gate almost every morning, nudging him toward Thomas, and rumbling until he crouched down to greet him. Sometimes she refused to quiet until Thomas sat on the ground. Other times she flopped dramatically onto her side, rolling like a domestic animal demanding attention. "She's manipulating you," Aaron teased. Thomas only smiled. Sweet talker. The nickname stuck. Soon, everyone was calling her that. Sweet talker, the bear who negotiated, who scolded, who demanded, who pleaded and persuaded her way into their hearts. As the months passed, Ryan grew stronger. He wrestled with branches, bounded clumsily around the enclosure, and ignored his mother's calls only to come tumbling back into her side. Each time he did, she rumbled proudly and then turned to Thomas with a sound like she was reporting his progress. The day eventually came when Daniel raised the question. What happens when Ryan's old enough? He isn't broken like some rescues. He could go back to the wild. Thomas looked at Luma, who was rumbling softly, while Ryan gnawed on his bootlaces. "That's not our decision," he said. "That's hers." So they built a passage from the enclosure into the edge of the protected forest, a one-way gate that Ryan could use if he chose. For days he ignored it. Then one morning he padded to the edge, turned back once to his mother, and slipped into the trees. Luma didn't chase him. She let out a low, throaty rumble, full of pride and sorrow. Thomas sat outside the gate with her, watching. "He's ready," he whispered. For 3 weeks, Ryan came and went. Sometimes he bounded back into the enclosure, burrs clinging to his fur, his eyes bright with wild energy. Sometimes he returned exhausted, curling against his mother before slipping out again. Finally, one morning, he didn't return. Thomas waited with Luma all day. She paced, rumbled, moaned, but as the sun sank low, she settled in the grass with calm eyes. She knew he was gone to the wild for good. "You did it," Thomas whispered through the bars. "You raised him." Luma turned her head, locked eyes with him, and rumbled once, sharp and sure. It sounded almost like "thank you." But the story didn't end there. Months later, when autumn winds swept through the oaks, Thomas sat at the clearing's edge, a thermos warm in his hands. The sky was painted with streaks of orange and violet when movement stirred in the underbrush. At first he thought it was a deer. But then came the familiar gait, heavy yet deliberate, and the silhouette of tufted ears above a broad head. Luma emerged from the trees, sleek and strong now, her coat gleaming like burnished bronze. She no longer crept as she once had. She strode with the steady rhythm of a creature healed by time and freedom. Yet when her amber eyes found Thomas across the clearing, they softened, not with weakness, but recognition. Beside her bounded Ryan, his body long and muscled, his movements betraying the strength of a young predator. He was no longer the wobbly cub who had once clung to Thomas's boots. And yet, in his boundless leaps and playful tumbles, there lingered a trace of that cub still inside him. But Ryan wasn't alone. At his side wobbled a tiny cub, its ears too large for its head, its legs stumbling awkwardly over the grass. Thomas's breath caught. His throat tightened until it almost hurt. Luma grumbled, her voice carrying across the clearing like a call meant only for him. Ryan added his own high, eager rumbles. Then Luma did something that rooted Thomas to the ground. She dropped the new cub at his boots, just as she had all those months ago with Ryan. She stepped back, her eyes steady on his. This was an introduction. This too was trust. The cub sniffed his shoe, then clumsily scrambled up onto it. Thomas crouched, his voice breaking as he whispered, "Another sweet talker, huh?" Behind him, Aaron's voice came out hushed. "They trust you, Doc. They really do." The cub nosed at his knee, then crawled into his lap with clumsy determination, paws sliding as if the earth itself hadn't quite figured out how to hold him up yet. Thomas laughed through tears, his chest hitching with the impossible mixture of joy and ache that came with moments too big for words. Luma rumbled proudly, her massive body vibrating with a low thunder that seemed to reach into the ground beneath them. Ryan circled them, grunting encouragement like an older brother, each sound carrying both authority and delight. Thomas's hand hovered before finally resting lightly on the cub's back, feeling the fragile strength there, the pulse of something new and wild, yet impossibly trusting. The cub pressed harder into him, a tiny furnace of life, eyes blinking up with a curiosity that made Thomas's throat tighten. For a long, aching moment, man and bear breathed the same air, the same rhythm, as though boundaries had dissolved, leaving only the raw honesty of existence. They didn't stay long, they never did. Wildness still called them back, the pull of streams, wind, and shadow paths that no human could ever map. But in those fleeting minutes, with the cub pressed against him and the mother's steady rumble filling the clearing, Thomas felt something older than words. Not ownership, not rescue, something deeper. A language between human and wild, spoken not in sentences but in patience, in trust, in the endless sweet talk of a mother bear who had once chosen him, and who now returned with proof of that choice in the form of new life. Aaron stood silently, hat in his hands, his own eyes shining, though he said nothing more. The clearing held its breath with them, the fading sun casting golden bars across the grass, painting the cub's fur in light like an anointing. The air was heavy with the scent of pine, of earth cooling after a hot day, of something eternal. Time stretched thin, fragile, as if the world might break if either of them moved too quickly. When Luma finally shifted, it was with the quiet assurance of a queen reclaiming her own. The cub lingered, turning once to nose Thomas's hand before tumbling clumsily back to her side. Ryan brushed close as if to promise, "This isn't the end." Their eyes met his with a knowing he couldn't explain, and Thomas understood it was not just chance that had brought them to him. Again and again, it was choice, deliberate and unshakable. When they finally slipped back into the woods, their shapes swallowed by the gold streaks of sunset, silence filled the clearing. The last rays caught their silhouettes, stretching them into myths, until even those shadows melted into the forest's endless hush. Thomas stayed kneeling in the grass, the sound of their rumbles still echoing in his ears, vibrating through his bones like a memory that refused to fade. A quiet smile spread over his face, unshakable, because he knew they would be back.